Hello and welcome back to One on One, the show where we take a deeper dive into a topic affecting the game of football. And today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about financial fair play, what it is, what's going on at the moment, and the future of it. Let's start with what it is. Financial fair play was introduced in 2011 by UEFA, and essentially it requires European football clubs to open their books to football's administrators. Essentially, this is a way of proving to football's governing bodies that they can pay players, staff, other clubs, tax authorities, anybody they owe money to, using legitimate sources of revenue. So that's commercial, ticket revenue, sporting revenue, so that's prize money from various competitions, and of course, television money. Now, some of clubs' spending doesn't get counted towards FFP, so money they spend on youth teams, that they spend on stadiums, that they spend on community work, all of that is exempt, which essentially means that clubs are allowed to invest in their future and the area they exist in without UEFA penalising them for it. And generally the idea isn't to prevent clubs spending, but to prevent them spending beyond their means. And there are two extra effects of it. One is to avoid cash-rich owners buying a club and pumping money into it. This is what Arsene Wenger called financial doping. We saw this in the past with Leeds and with Portsmouth. Back in 2010, they owed £60 million to one of their creditors, and it meant that in the end they couldn't pay player salaries. Now, as a result, they got a points deduction, they got a relegation, they were almost liquidated at the end. And the secondary effect is preventing leveraged buyouts. Now, a leveraged buyout is when a corporation or an individual borrows a huge amount of money so they can purchase a club, knowing that once they have purchased the club, they can use the club's revenue to pay back the people they owe. Now, this is what happened with the Glazers when they took over Man United. That was a highly leveraged buyout. And it essentially means that after they took over the club, they saddled it with a bunch of debt and spent about £500 million over the next 6 years just paying back all the people that they owed money to. And Man United still are kind of financially crippled by that. So it's essentially an artificial debt being put on the club from outside. Now, obviously, UEFA understand that you're going to spend more money in one summer than you are in another, and as a result, their assessments are taken over a rolling 3-year period. So let's move on to how UEFA have enforced it. Now, principally, when teams have breached financial fair play, they've been punished with fines. We saw this with Man City and with PSG. Now, back in 2014, City were fined about £49 million, though 32 million of that was suspended, essentially saying that will come into effect if you breach financial fair play regulations again. They had spending restrictions imposed, and they were told that their squad size would be limited for the 2014-15 Champions League. Now, PSG got a €60 million fine in 2017. This was when the CFCB, which is the organisation, part of UEFA essentially, that are charged with administering financial fair play, they determined that one of PSG's commercial deals was a little bit dodgy. PSG had made 167 million from the Qatar Tourism Authority. And essentially the CFCB said this was massively above market rate for what could be expected. They used deals like the Azerbaijan deal that Atletico Madrid had to say, actually, we think they're spending more than they need to for this deal and essentially putting money into your coffers that shouldn't be there. Now, that's not that surprising given that the chairman of PSG, Nasser El Khelaifi, is actually a minister without portfolio in the Qatari government, and the Qatari government owns the Qatari Investment Authority, who own PSG, and they also run the Qatari Tourism Authority, which is part of their government. So in that situation, they gave a hugely inflated sponsorship deal so they could essentially dump a bunch of money into PSG to cover all their debts. However, we're talking about cash-rich clubs getting fines here, and the CFCB has actually never really employed its nuclear option, which is banning a club from European competition. In 2018, Milan were handed a one-season ban by the CFCB. Basically, when you get back into the European competitions, you will miss out on a year. But in the end, they appealed to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and it was overturned, which kind of made the CFCB seem even more toothless than they did before. Especially seeing as you have to imagine that Man City or PSG would fight even harder if they were being barred from the Champions League rather than Milan being barred from the Europa League. And in real terms, a lot of these clubs can plan for fines. They can essentially say, okay, we'll set aside 50 million for a rainy day because at some point we're going to run afoul of FFP, and they can sort of factor that into their spending. So what does this mean for the future of financial fair play? Well, the refusal of the CFCB to go toe-to-toe with the super clubs mean that some teams, like Man City, are starting to push back against their authority. Now, the Citizens are currently being investigated for alleged breaches of FFP after German news magazine Der Spiegel published leaked documents which suggest that they found a way to get around regulations. These documents suggest that City and their sponsors manipulated contracts in order to wipe out about £10 million worth of revenue. In an alleged email from an executive, he says that essentially they need some Qatari money in order to cover a £10 million shortfall in their books. So after that, UEFA said that they would reopen investigations into City, and their investigators subsequently recommended that City be banned from the Champions League for the 2019-20 season. Yves Leterme, who was the chief FFP investigator, said back in February that if City were found to have breached regulations, they would face the heaviest punishment possible. Now, City understand there's a PR element to this, so they hit back with a really strong statement criticising Leterme's running of the investigation and calling it wholly unsatisfactory, curtailed and hostile, suggesting that basically the CFCP were out to get them. And another leaked doc quoted City chairman Khaldoun Al-Mubarak as saying that he would rather spend £50 million on the 30 best lawyers in the world to sue UEFA for the next 10 years than simply lie down and give them the money instead. So that suggests that they are gearing up for a fight. And it kind of seems like other clubs are looking for ways around the rules too. In the last week, Barcelona have signed Neto from Valencia for about €35 million, while Jasper Cillessen, Barcelona's backup goalkeeper, has gone the other way for the same fee. Now, one of those, I think, will go through before the summer deadline, essentially before the 1st of July, when we tick over from one financial year into another, and another will go through afterwards. Now, that could be a way of balancing one club's books in the previous 3-year period and giving another team a bit of a head start in the next 3-year period. And given that Barca have spent huge sums over the last 3 years, it would make sense that they'd need that extra 35 mil on their books as they set about spending even more this summer. And while clubs have often arranged transfers in order to get around financial fair play, it does seem like it's becoming more blatant. So the CFCB may need to find ways to monitor transfer fees and the way that deals actually happen more closely over the next few years. So now with the big teams setting their faces against UEFA, the fight has actually got bigger. European football administrators are not just fighting for the future of FFP, but to prove that they can be credible referees of fairness in the sport going forward. And if they don't come out on top, then it will be very clear that it's not FIFA, UEFA, or the CFCB who make the rules, it's the super clubs. And I think that we should all be extremely worried about a future in which PSG, Man City, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Chelsea, and all the others are making the rules for us. So that was our one-on-one on FFP, but what would you like to see us cover on this show? Let us know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to drop us a like and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell to never miss a video, and we'll see you next time.